So many PBS programs have inspired me as a person and as a parent over the years. But I think it was the broadcast of When This You See, Remember Me by Perry Miller Adato. She's no longer with us, but it's a wonderful film about the life of Gertrude Stein. And in it, she began to use actors on stage reading first-person material. And this light bulb went off in me and said, in addition to the third-person narrator, I can have first-person voices. They don't have to be on stage. They can be off camera while we try to create a whole world of history, which I've spent the last 50 years trying to do. PBS opens up new worlds, new perspectives for all of us, today and tomorrow, with stories and performances that bring us together. We can all share in the inspiration, the wonder, and the world that PBS brings into our homes. Support your PBS station today.
20 years ago, I was a fervent neo-Nazi and Holocaust denier. It's a life I've long left behind. But I continue to struggle with my role in contributing to such a dark legacy. The inescapable truth is that white supremacist ideology, if left unchecked, always ends in murder. And we ignore the lessons of history at our own peril.
Tuesday, April 22nd at 11 p.m.
In the fourth year of Changing Planet, we are focusing on two of the largest river restoration projects ever attempted.
What?
One urban.
The River Seine is undergoing a colossal detox.
One wild and remote.
These dams will be completely gone within a matter of months.
Everyone knows there's hope.
It's big.
These are stories of ambition and action for our changing planet.
Wednesday, April 23rd at 10 p.m.
Funding for presentation of this program is provided by...
A successful business owner sells his company and restores his father's historic jazz club with his son. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you bring people together. Life well planned.
You know, as somebody coming out of college, it can be very nerve-wracking, not knowing what to expect, whether you'll like your job or not, whether you'll make friends, whether you'll fit in. And here, I feel like it's so welcoming and such an inclusive place to work. You just feel like you're valued.
Funding was also provided by the Freeman Foundation,
the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
And now, BBC News.
I'm Helena Humphrey in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Mourners pray into the night at the Vatican's St. Peter's Square for Pope Francis, who has died at the age of 88. The Vatican says the Pope died of a stroke and heart failure. His funeral will take place within a week. The Pontiff's death prompts an outpouring of grief across the globe. The Pope was the leader of more than 1 billion Catholics. President Trump says that he will attend Pope Francis's funeral and orders US flags to be flown at half-mast in the Pope's honor. Welcome to World News America. I'm Helena Humphrey. Very good to have you with us. Millions of Catholics around the world are in mourning after the death of Pope Francis. He was 88 years old. The Vatican announced that he died at 7:35 this morning, less than 24 hours after he was last seen in public blessing the Easter crowds. Let's take you to St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, where crowds continue to gather after the first public prayers. In a statement released by the Vatican, Pope Francis said that he wished to be buried not at St. Peter's like many popes before him, but at Rome's Basilica of St. Mary Major. His final testament reads in part, "The tomb should be in the ground, simple, without particular ornamentation, bearing only the inscription Franciscus." The Vatican says that he died following a stroke and heart failure. He had recently been discharged from hospital after weeks of treatment for an infection. Well, our Mariam Mashiri is at the Vatican for us tonight. We can cross over to her now. Mariam, very good to have you with us. Describe the atmosphere there. What have people been telling you?
Well, Helena, as you might imagine, the mood here in Rome, in the Vatican City, is a somber one. Now, the pontiff may have been 88 years old. He may have been in ill health, but his passing came as a surprise for many here, because don't forget, over the weekend, there was a celebration of Easter Mass here in Vatican City. And during that celebration, the Pope made a surprise appearance on the balcony behind me. He gave a blessing. He even climbed into the Pope Mobile, and to the delight and excitement of the crowds of people here, he drove around the square and greeted many of the pilgrims. And that's one of the reasons why there is a small sense of shock, I would say, here in Vatican City. Now, don't forget, the Pope had been gravely ill for a while. Now, he was hospitalized in February. He was only released from hospital on the 23rd of March after battling double pneumonia. He passed away, as you said there, from a stroke and from heart failure. That is what the Vatican are telling us. So as people here continue to digest the news and to think about what is going to happen over the coming days, one of the things that many people will be thinking about is the Pope's legacy. And in many ways, Helena, he was the first, like, for example, he was the first Pope from the Americas. He was the first Pope to be a Jesuit Pope. He was also the first Pope from the Southern Hemisphere. And if you go back to his choice of name when he was first announced all the way back in 2013 after the retirement of Pope Benedict XVI, he chose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi. Now, St. Francis was one of the patron saints who really championed the poor. He loved animals, he felt strongly about the environment, and those are some of the themes that Pope Francis kept going during his papacy, Helena. So that's one of the many things and many parts of his legacy that people will be thinking about tonight.
And Mariam, briefly, if you don't mind, what can we be expecting in the coming hours, the coming days, in terms of proceedings and public mourning?
Well, the death of a pope, Helena, brings about a chain of events, a chain of inevitable events that have been set in stone over centuries. We will be seeing over the coming days a lying in state of Pope Francis. That'll give pilgrims who arrive here a chance to see his body. Then, either on day 4, 5 or 6 after his death, there will be a funeral held here in St. Peter's Basilica. We believe, according to Italian media, that funeral will take place on Saturday. After that funeral, there will be the Novem Diales. That's Latin for 9 days, and we will expect at least 9 days of mourning for the Pope, after which we will see the beginning of the conclave. That is the process by which a new Pope will be chosen.
Mariam Mashiri at the Vatican in Rome. Mariam, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Will Grant now. He is in Mexico City. Will, Mariam was just mentioning there, this was a pope of many firsts, including the first Latin American pontiff, an extraordinary moment for the region when he was elected.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Pope's legacy in Latin America extends the length and breadth of the continent throughout the Americas. Let's remember that Latin America is home to around 40% of the world's Catholics. There are hundreds of millions of Catholics in this region. And of course, it was a source of great pride for them to have the Pope, the first Latin American Pope, at the head of the Catholic Church. Very important to so many ordinary Catholics in this part of the world, not least here where I am, in Mexico City, where a service has been held in the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in his honor. Partly, of course, his legacy is strongest and most important in Argentina, where 7 days of national mourning have been called, a country that he never went back to after he was named Pope, which I think was unfortunate for some Argentines who had hoped he would return, but he was never able to, perhaps not wanting to be drawn into national politics.
And across the region more broadly in Latin America, Will, what kind of reaction are we seeing?
Well, it's such a spread because, of course, I've mentioned there Argentina and the importance to him, to ordinary Catholics there, but also countries that aren't traditionally associated with the Catholic faith. Cuba, for example, he played such a role in the brief détente between the Obama administration and the Cuban government, where indeed, to the point that Raul Castro said, he was the only man who could push him back to the Catholic Church. And again, here in Mexico, where he was conscious to go to areas which were controlled by drug cartels like the states of Michoacan and Chihuahua.
Our correspondent Will Grant there in Mexico City. Will, good to talk to you. Thank you. Well, we can now turn to John Sudworth, our correspondent, who is in Boston. John, very good to have you with us on this day as well. Just talk us through the reaction that you are seeing, you are hearing there, talking to people.
Well, Helena, Boston is, of course, one of the important centres of American Catholicism, and as you'd expect, tributes pouring in from religious leaders. The Archbishop here saying he is deeply saddened to hear the news of the Pope's death, and the governor of this state of Massachusetts paying tribute to what she said was the Pope's advocacy on issues like immigration, on human rights, and on social justice. But of course, you can't think of Boston, Helena, without also recognising that it is the centre of one of the biggest child sexual abuse scandals to hit the church in recent decades. And Mitchell Garabedian is a lawyer who has fought a long and bitter fight with the Catholic Church to win justice on behalf of some of those survivors. Mitchell, when you speak to your clients today, what's their reaction to the news of the Pope's death?
Some of them are sad that the Pope has passed away, many of them. Many survivors and victims are sad, but many are disappointed, almost all of them, if not all of them, disappointed that there really hasn't been any substantive change within the Catholic Church. There hasn't been any transparency. Pope Francis said the right things, he meant the right things, but the bureaucracy just shut him down, wouldn't let him proceed with any sort of substantive change.
And why is that, Mitchell? Because this, as you say, was a Pope who has often said the right things. He's apologised for the abuse scandals. Why hasn't he been able to turn those words into the kind of action your clients would like to see?
I believe it's because clergy sexual abuse is so enculturated within the Catholic Church, and they're protected by the First Amendment, that they don't want to change. They feel as they don't have to change. We need transparency. The Pope should out bishops who have sexually abused children or covered up the sexual abuse of children, for instance.
Question of secrecy. You've won some victories on that. Why is that so difficult?
Well, canon law has a canon, is canon 489. It says any document scandalous to the church shall be kept under lock and key by the bishop or the archbishop. And that's where the clergy sexual abuse documents are. Those reveal the truth. All those documents, that's how we got rid of cardinal Law in the early 2000s. It was found in those documents that he was transferring priests to churches without warning children or their parents about a priest being a pedophile.
Mitchell, thank you very much for talking to us. Helena, a mixed legacy then for Pope Francis, for some of the survivors of sexual abuse in this city. They will, of course, be watching very carefully now the process to find his successor.
John Sudworth there in Boston. John, thank you. Well, this is what will happen over the next few days as Catholics around the world say farewell to the Pope. Well, Pope Francis will lie in rest at the chapel at his St. Martha residence on Monday evening. The Pope's funeral is traditionally held within 4 to 6 days of his death, with the funeral mass taking place in St. Peter's Square itself. And Pope Francis's death has set in motion the conclave, which is the political process for the Church to select a new leader The vote is held in the Sistine Chapel, and it usually takes place some 15 to 20 days after the Pope's death. Well, with me now is Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago. Very good to have you with us. Welcome to the programme. Pope Francis has often been called the People's Pope, something of a pastor as much as a pontiff. I'd just like to begin by getting your reflections on his legacy tonight.
Well, thank you, Helena, for having me. His legacy, I think, is tied to the approach that he had to all of his life. Namely, he wanted to be an authentic human being. And he was an individual who cared about people, who was in touch with human suffering. And he wanted people to know that, as he said, the name of God is mercy. So that was, I think, what motivated him to move forward. And he also wanted the church to respond along those lines. That's why he called the church to be a field hospital. And he cared deeply about it. You had a guest on who talked about the abuse crisis. The Holy Father met regularly with abuse victims. And I think it's also important to clarify that he was the one who put in place a procedure by which bishops who, in fact, mishandled cases or even abused would be held accountable. And we also have, of course, in this country and elsewhere, a policy by which, in fact, those who offend children are taken out of ministry. There is not a priest in this country who has offended a child who is in ministry today. So we do have transparency and accountability going forward as a result of many of the procedures that Pope Francis put in.
And his passing now sets in motion the process of electing a new pope, the conclave in Rome, to which you will also be called. What kind of leadership do you hope to see the church embrace next?
Well, I think that in this period of mourning, my heart and my head are not going there yet. And so I really can't give an intelligent response to that. I believe, though, that the cardinals, when they gather together, will have ample time to discuss all of this. But this is a time now for us to grieve and to mourn and to pray for his repose.
And on a personal note, is there a memory, perhaps a moment that you shared with him or in his presence that really stays with you?
Well, the Holy Father could be very serious about issues, like he was when he asked me to be one of the organizers of the 2019 summit on abuse, and he wanted facts to be brought out, but he also did not take himself seriously, and he could put people at ease by his sense of humor, his way in which he could joke with someone. He came across as an individual who lived a real life and with no pretense. And so time and again, I saw that in his personality and the way that he discussed with other people and the way he gathered people around him. He was an authentic human being and an individual, I think, that inspired all of us to be more authentic in our humanity.
You have touched on it a little, but he was seen as something of more of a reformer, more liberal in some ways than his predecessors. How do you think the church changed under his guidance and leadership?
Well, I think that image that he gave us of the church being a field hospital, and for those who are leaders in the church who know the smell of the sheep, are very important images that to say something to our imagination. So he allowed us to be more expansive in how we view our life as a church. You know, there was a commentator, David Brooks, who commented on his apostolic letter, The Joy of the Gospel. He used the word, he said, Francis is gorgeous. And what he meant by that is not necessarily in physical beauty, but in the sense of being expansive and wide in his approach, where people were included. And also there were areas that we could discuss that perhaps others would not in the past. So he had a gorgeous way of looking at life.
And do you think there were any areas, briefly if you don't mind, where he would have wanted to have seen more change had time allowed?
Well, yes, I think that particularly with regard to the participation of the laity, he pushed for that in his later years with the synodal approach to the church where we're walking together. but he made some important inroads there. When you think about here, we have a woman who is now the governor of Vatican City. We have a woman who is a head of one of the dicasteries for religious. We have women in other positions as well, and lay people. So he has made headway, and he's reformed the Curia in such a way that I think opens the door for more inclusion of laity as well as women in the leadership roles of the church.
Cardinal Blaise Cupich, the Archbishop of Chicago, thank you so much for being with us on this day.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, one of Pope Francis's priorities was advocating for migrants. His first trip outside of Rome was to the Italian island of Lampedusa, where he led prayers for migrants and refugees lost at sea. And in 2016, he held a mass at the US-Mexico border where he said that migrants are our brothers and sisters. Well, reacting to the Pope's death, Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Silla of San Antonio, Texas said, quote, "We were inspired by the Holy Father's advocacy for migrants globally and of his commitment to provide services and minister to all of God's children." Well, we can speak now to Gustavo Garcia Silla, Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Antonio. Welcome to you and thank you for being with us on this day. I'd just like to begin by getting your thoughts on the passing of Pope Francis.
Well, it's difficult. There is some sadness, but at the same time, there is tremendous hope. And it's how he ended his papers, proclaiming a jubilee, pilgrims of hope. And the encounter that I had with them, no matter what was the issue, the difficult situation, you all encounter with him, you end hope. He was raising up the situation, no matter which situation it was. And, well, I am missing a father, Pope's father.
Yeah.
And with his dad, is not a loss, because what he did was good for the glory of God and well-being of people, and he will do a greater work by God's will from heaven.
We know that he spoke and made central one of the issues to his papacy, that of migrants and of refugees. And in his final months, Pope Francis did speak out strongly against President Trump's immigration policies, particularly mass deportations. How significant do you think that moment was for the church and also for people in your congregation?
Well, the Pope from the very beginning, not only as a Pope, but his whole life is in the context of migration. We think that now we have a trend of migration. He came from a family that were migrants from Italy, in South America, in Argentina, and he then understood in a day-to-day basis the importance of treat one another with dignity. And he helped during his papacy from the very first days. His first visit to Lampedusa was an expression of what he felt not only was in his heart, but what God was asking him. And we now, migration is not only regionally, it's globally. And there are many, many people suffering. The leadership in the world regarding welcoming migrants and refugees, which Pope Francis opposed completely based on the gospel. In the life of Jesus, the example of Jesus, the words of Jesus, and the passion and resurrection of the Lord, who embraces every human being, and especially those who are treated badly. They're treating like trash. when decisions are made about their lives, the lives of the family, the lives of the children. And we are talking about millions of people throughout the world that are experiencing injustice, speaking about even today. And so the message of Pope Francis is loud, is strong, filled with fidelity to the gospel of Jesus, courage, and universal law.
Okay. Gustavo Garcia Silla, Archbishop of the Archdiocese of San Antonio, Texas. Thank you so very much for being with us here on BBC News on this day.
You're welcome.
Well, let's turn to some other news now. And President Trump is standing behind his defense secretary, dismissing as fake news reports that Pete Hegseth shared sensitive information on a second chat group, this time including his wife, brother, and personal lawyer. The White House rejected an NPR report that the White House is looking to replace Pete Hegseth as defense secretary. Well, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says that President Trump, quote, stands strongly behind Mr. Hegseth. And on Sunday, the New York Times reported that the Defense Secretary shared information about U.S. airstrikes on Yemen in a second private group on the Signal app, which included his wife, brother, and lawyer. Now, Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon became the first sitting GOP lawmaker to suggest that President Trump should fire Mr. Hegseth, calling him an amateur person with little experience. Let's hear from Mr. Hegseth now.
See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me.
Well, let's turn now to some other important news around the world. President Putin says Ukrainian proposals for a 30-day ceasefire to prevent strikes on civilian infrastructure needed to be carefully assessed. He was speaking after the expiry of a brief period of what he announced as an Easter truce. That's a temporary pause in long-distance airstrikes, but both sides accused each other of continued hostilities on the front. Ukraine has described the truce as a PR exercise by Moscow. US President Donald Trump escalated attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Monday. On Truth Social, the president called Mr. Powell a major loser and warned that the US economy will slow down unless the Fed cut interest rates. The attack comes days after he threatened Jerome Powell's job. Mr. Powell has stated that President Trump cannot legally remove him until his term expires next May. US Vice President J.D. Vance met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Monday. The two are expected to discuss a trade deal that Mr. Modi hopes to secure within the 90-day pause on tariffs announced by President Trump last month. We'll leave you now with a look back at the life of Pope Francis after his death this morning.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
And before we go, let's just show you these live pictures. They are coming into us from Buenos Aires in Argentina, where Mass is being held as mourners pay their respects to Pope Francis. Well, earlier, large crowds gathered in Rome, St. Peter's Square, to hear the first public prayers. And inside the Vatican, the body of the Pope is being placed in a coffin and could be moved to St. Peter's Basilica to lie in state as early as Wednesday. Currently, it is lying in rest at a chapel there at the Vatican. Well, the funeral of Latin America's first Pope will take place within a week. He's chosen to be buried in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome rather than in the Vatican, like many of his predecessors. And at his request, the coffin will be placed in the ground with no particular decoration or ornamentation. You're watching BBC News. This is World News America. I'm Helena Humphrey in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Funding for presentation of this program is provided by
Financial services firm Raymond James.
BDO, accountants and advisors.
Funding was also provided by the Freeman Foundation,
The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
BBC's journalists here in Ukraine,
across southern Israel, here in Michigan,
Beirut, China, Italy, Russia,
Paris.
Wherever news breaks, we're there.
Live from Washington, this is BBC News.
Get the free PBS app now and stream the best of PBS.
All over the world, hatred and Holocaust denial are on the rise. And as we reach a moment when the last survivors are passing on, it's now up to us historians to make sure that the full enormity of what happened will always be remembered.
Auschwitz did not fall from the sky. It comes step by step. Evil comes step by step.
Simon Schama, The Holocaust, 80 Years On, Tuesday night at 9.
My name is Brad Stauffer from Digital Foundry. We've been a supporter of KQED since 2005. It's a great way for us as a technology organization to be able to reach out to partners, to customers, and employees. When we hear from our clients that they've heard of us on KQED, it makes us feel very connected to the Bay Area community. I'm Brad Stauffer with Digital Foundry, and I'm KQED.
Learn more at sponsor@kqed.org.
PBS NewsHour and KQED present the Reframe Festival, featuring timely discussions and in-depth interviews with changemakers, including U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, journalist and Pivot podcast host Kara Swisher, former U.S. Labor Secretary Robert Reich, and many more. May 1st at the Sidney Goldstein Theater and May 2nd at KQED Studios. Information and tickets at kqed.org/reframe.
Here's tonight's lineup on KQED, made possible by your support.